Welcome back to the Mentor Show, which offers quick lessons packaged within minisodes for busy founders and startup leaders like you. I'm Adel, and I'm being mentored live and unscripted by Ed, who's built, sold, turned around, and scaled startups all the way to the New York Stock Exchange. He's based in the US, a developed economy, and I'm based in Dubai, a hub within an emerging economy. And we compare notes. This is real talk, no scripts, no theory. Let's get into it. So, last time we were talking about ESOPs. And one of the things that I was assuming, and then I found out through you and reality hit me, is when you join a startup, there are many factors that are involved in getting access to the share options. If I'm an employee, I'm not a co-founder. And there is a standard practice in the developed world. However, here in the emerging markets like in the Arab world or the Middle East, I'm assuming it's the same in Africa and India and many of these emerging economies, because the standards are not there, because they're learning as well, but they could take advantage of the employees by playing around with the ideas and not being fair with them. And then there are mismatched expectations. I can't blame the founders and I can't blame the employees. So before we do any of that, we first need to understand what's the logic behind the option pools. Do you earn the shares or do you earn the right to buy the shares? And what's the standard practice? And all of that, I'll just leave it to you. So you take us from zero. It's also for me because I need to validate the knowledge I have. Where am I still getting it wrong, and where I'm right, where I learned my lessons?
So let me answer your question directly. Shares in a company can be granted to you immediately, and you own them. Shares can also be issued as options, not grants, options. And the options are just what that word means in English. You have the opportunity to purchase those shares at a very discounted price, what's called the option strike price. I'll explain that in just a bit. But those options vest over time, typically 4 years. So let's go back and review what is a stock grant and why would it be used? A stock grant is the immediate award of some number of shares of stock to someone as recognition for their service, could be a board member, for fair trade in exchange for not charging a fee. For example, a consultant that charges $100 an hour for their service might choose to take half of their compensation in cash, $50, and the other 50 in the form of stock grants. So the company would be using a stock grant as the equivalent of cash, as an example. Let's shift to options. Options are a way to issue equity interests, and I will come back and talk about this language called equity, in exchange for an employee's enthusiasm and loyalty to the business. So if I want to build a company, and I know that over time I'm going to go from 2 employees to 10 employees to 50 employees, I might choose to use stock options as an incentive to keep employees excited about where the business is going, how profitable the business could be, how fast the growth could be. Because as the company succeeds more and more, the value of those stock options should also increase. So it's used really as an incentive mechanism to keep employees. It's also used as an incentive mechanism to attract employees. If I provide you options, but your current employer does not, you have the ability to influence some of your own wealth creation by helping me create a more successful company. So let me pause there, because that gives a direct answer to your questions between, can you give stock or do you have to earn your stock? I think that to have a complete conversation around the use of stock in a startup organization or even a later stage organization, we have to go back and level the conversational playing field in the vocabulary. So if I'm an employee looking to change my career, change my job, or if I'm the employer looking to attract the best employees I can possibly find, we're going to use equity participation as the turn of phrase, right? So as the employer, I'll put out a job description. I'll say the compensation for this position is X amount of dollars, Y amount of bonus, and Z amount of equity participation, stock. Okay? You're getting ownership in the company. And of course, all of these categories of compensation come with certain expectations and rules, right? You get paid your paycheck if you show up and do a good job. You get your bonus if you exceed certain company performance parameters. And equity is the long-term financial reward that you get for sticking with the business and building it out over a period of time. Again, typically 4 years. These mechanisms work very well in the Western markets, in the developed markets, because of a concept called liquidity. Liquidity is simply, how do you sell your business, either partially or completely? That's the liquidity event. It could be a trade sale to a bigger company. It could be a merger with an equal company to create a bigger company. And in those two cases, either the direct sale to a larger company, an acquisition, or a merger with an equal company to create a bigger business. That's the M&A activity that defines a liquidity event. It could also be an IPO, the sale of equity to the general public. So when you hear about an IPO on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ exchange or the London Stock Exchange or the German DAX or the French, whatever the CAC marketplace, that is a company selling its equity to the open market. And employees, if they have vested, could also sell their shares to the open market. I think the challenge today in the GCC is that those liquidity events aren't very frequent. And so until you can start to see an active market in IPOs or an active market in merger and acquisition activity, you really have to ask the question, let's say you're the employee applying for a job. I think it's a very fair question to ask the hiring manager or the CEO, what are your plans to create a liquidity event? That's a very normal question. Because if they can't give you an answer, you almost have to ask the question, is the issuance of shares really an incentive? In fact, if you have no plans for liquidity, just pay me in cash. That might be more important to me than this empty promise of ownership in the business, but no plan to ever create a liquidity event. Let me stop there. Does that make sense?
That's it for this minisode. Big thanks to Ed and to all of you for tuning in. If this sparked something, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and make sure you share it within your network. Got a question for Ed? Drop it within the comments. See you next time.
Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated organization. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. We encourage listeners to conduct their own research and consult with relevant professionals before making any business or career decisions.